Iron Fireside chats. We've got a few irons in the fire for this one today because we're very lucky to have Malik with us, the chair and the founder of Gift, a global impact fintech group. So Malik, hello, welcome. It's lovely to see you.
Likewise, Adam, it's my pleasure to be here.
So look, Gift is amazing, right? You've got all these countries across the world, all these amazing individuals, and as members, we get to see all this incredible things you guys are doing. There's lots of mainstream stuff that you guys are doing. There's obviously a lot of crypto. There's obviously amazing amount of what fintech is, but you've got this, obviously this theme through the middle, which is impact, which is, you know, what can fintech do for the world that's far larger than we are as individuals, or even fintech is as an industry. Can you just tell us, how do you get to sitting here on us on this call today? Like, what was your journey, man? It's fascinating.
Thank you, Adam. It's actually a very, very long answer, so I'll try and give only bullet points because a lot of it has evolved organically. A lot of it, I guess, is driven by our respective desires to use technology for impact and not just for selling things. So I come from a long banking background, digital banking background, where I've seen the evolution of the fintech and the digital industry. And it was, great. I saw firsthand how it changed the financial services industry fundamentally. But at the end of the day, you were doing or you were leveraging digital to kind of make more money for a large global organization. And somewhere something within me used to kind of say that, hey, there's so much more that all these emerging technologies can do. And in many ways, it's done it through fintech in terms of decentralization, democratization of finance, power to the little person, and creating more opportunities for inclusive finance. So that's where the idea of Gift was born. And then we said we really need to kind of not just create a global think tank for the top minds and leaders in the fintech ecosystem, but also bring together individuals, organizations, multilateral agencies, regulators, academics who believe in the I part of it. And as you rightly said, the I in our name stands for actually three things: innovation, impact, and inclusion. So you can kind of interchangeably use them. But essentially, the mantra is innovation for impact and inclusion. So a lot of what we do as a think tank focuses on working with policymakers, working with the community, working with the ecosystem, on not just how technology is evolving and how this, the landscape will be shaped, reshaped, evolve, or completely change in the next 5 to 10 years, but how can we do it in a way so that it creates a more inclusive, it creates a more impactful ecosystem, and it doesn't lead to the worry that many thinkers have said, that we might actually end up creating a greater digital divide. So our aim is to try and ensure that instead of a dystopian future, we really have a future in which everybody can participate and many can benefit from it.
That's wonderful. And I'm really, this inclusion part is, as you said, is such a huge issue for where the world is heading. You know, you're right, it can go one of two ways here. Either that gap gets bigger, or we start to narrow that gap. And that's, I mean, this is why, so we're working on some projects together, and before we go any further, like if you want to learn more about Gift, absolutely head to their website. So we've got the website in the show notes beneath, and also LinkedIn. So really active on LinkedIn you get, and it's really great because you start getting all these updates on what the different members are doing. And so you start to see a bigger picture of what the world's happening. So please join there. We'll also be covering this in the IOEN Telegram channel. So join our Telegram and follow us on Twitter. So because there's some really interesting stuff. So we've been working on this specific project on these NFTs for remote mini grids in Africa and Asia and other parts of the world, and connecting them to NFTs. And this is something that Gift and ION have put together as part of that inclusion component. That is, there's a lot of investors, a lot of people making lots of money in crypto. And our hypothesis was, well, what if we take some of that investment yield that's happening in yield farming and ask investors to divert that to mini grids that need extra electricity capacity? And so it's one of those things where the money is here in crypto, but actually it can start to move into real projects in other places. And what we found is an amazing response from the investors that they actually want to see this happening. And we've got investors who've taken their tokens and staked 100% of them just to get access to the NFTs. Well, access to the NFTs, but also to have this real impact. And it's firstly, it's really cool to be working with you guys on this project because you have such reach into these places, and the community is super international, right? The gift, like the very international. You cover most continents, is that right?
We cover all continents. We are 65 countries strong, and our goal is to become 100 countries strong by end of 2022.
Fantastic. So if you're watching and you want to be part of this, please reach out to Gift and join. So you're here, you wanted this, you want to see this change. What does sustainability fintech, and to have that innovation, impact, and inclusion, what does it mean to you? Like, what is it? Can you give us a definition of what that actually really is?
So, I'm really glad that you brought up this point. And Adam, like it always happens with any new disruptive or emerging technology, but also with policymakers. There's often a lot of noise and a lot of jargons thrown around. We just saw the COP26, summit conclude, and many of us perhaps feel that enough was not done. And therefore, the need for us as individuals, as participants in the ecosystem, we need to do our bit rather than relying or depending on governments or multilaterals to kind of necessarily work out the arrangements. And especially with decentralized technologies like blockchain, we now have, and with smart contracts, with NFTs, we now have a viable technology solution to achieve those goals. So when we talk about sustainable finance or sustainable fintech, I think the term is, at least from our side, is very, very simple, and the name itself, gives the clue. We need to use all the underpinning technologies or underlying technologies that drive fintech, whether it is in terms of machine learning, whether it is in terms of blockchain, whether it is in terms of cloud technologies, whether it is in terms of peer-to-peer interactions, all the stuff that has made fintech so powerful, and also much more of a viable economic operating model, right? Because the cost structure is low, you probably don't spend as much to acquire customers, etc. So how can you use or leverage these emerging technologies for creating a more sustainable world? And I think from a sustainability perspective, tokenomics has already offered us some clues from the way it has evolved, and we've been in this space for quite a while, so we've seen it evolve even in the pre-ICO days, etc. So the whole concept of a circular economy, in which what rewards you get is a function of how invested you are in the ecosystem. You just extend it to the real world, and that's how you get this perfect connection. And therefore, I'm glad, with the work that ION is doing, and you spoke about how you have investors using their, staking their tokens to fund real world projects. And that's exactly the kind of bridge we need. We need a bridge between, what crypto is now, what, 2 trillion plus economy. So it's not insignificant. You can't ignore it. And at the same time, for us in the community, we can't just be guided only by greed or commercial objectives. We now have to realize that there is a lot of locked in potential, and that locked in potential with DeFi, etc., with liquidity pools. What if you can create a bridge between the virtual world, the crypto world, and now with the metaverse coming in, there is all the more talk of a virtual world, but also the real world, because you cannot, we can say all we want about the metaverse, etc., but you cannot ignore the fact that the real world needs a lot of support in terms of inclusion as well as sustainability. And that's why we're happy, and I'm happy to be here, because you guys work at the intersection of all these three, right? You're working at the intersection of cutting edge innovation. You're working at the intersection of inclusion, given that you work in countries like Bangladesh, etc., and you're working at the intersection of sustainability in the way you're looking at clean energy and microgrids, etc. So I think this is a model to go forward. And really, we need to build upon this. We need many more of this. We need these things at scale. So, to kind of summarize the scalability we've seen in terms of exponential growth of the crypto economy, not just in terms of market cap or market participants, but now it's making a real impact in the real world, in the emerging world, is what we all need to be more and more conscious about. And as I said, you can't have a scenario where the decentralized finance world becomes more disjointed from the realities of the world, especially, and its challenges as well, right? So we can't create, or we can't have a situation where these technologies increase the divide. We have to use this to bridge the gap, and fundamentally these technologies uh, have an architecture, have a structure, have the decentralized model where millions of us can get together to make an impact, and therefore we don't need to necessarily depend or wait for authorities or policymakers to act. We can do our own bit.
I love it. You're so right. And that kind of discussion on the circular economy, that the fact that the technology starts to enable that to happen in a more secure way. Now we've had circular economies for a long time. It's basically what happened before money existed, and so it's that trading and bartering within an economy. But now we have a system whereby we can start to track that, whether that be clean water or biodiversity or energy or just microfinancing that can help in communities. It's actually starting to emerge. And one of the things that we've thought about a lot is the whole idea of the currency of the token is that it's just another representation of value in a different way to different people. And the fact that the $20 bill also doesn't exist. It's a social construct that we have. And so crypto is just another social construct, but it can be really useful, as you said, because that inclusivity, that anyone can download a wallet and start to play in this. And I think that's really fascinating, as you talked about there. And that, I think one of the things you mentioned at the beginning, COP26. So I've been spent 20 years working on climate change stuff. I sometimes feel really bad about that because we're still in a pretty bad situation, right? So I mean, look at COP26. One of the key linchpins of that was $100 billion a year in climate finance from developed to developing countries. And you're absolutely right. There is so much that we're still waiting for governments to sign, to send this money. And they are doing that. The multilateral institutions are doing it. But we have a full decentralized economy, $2 trillion worth, that is there and is making more money all the time. Like it is.
So if I may, Adam, just think of it, and you mentioned it yourself, right? $100 billion fund waiting for governments and kind of alignment between so many stakeholders. You just take 5% of the current crypto economy, that's $100 billion.
There we go. Done. It's amazing. And people, I remember there's a famous quote from I think it's Bill Gates, where he said, there's a certain level of cheeseburger where it doesn't get any better. You can't enjoy the cheeseburger anymore. It just is still a cheeseburger. And so there's a point where the level of money can be used for so much more interesting and important things. So yeah, and I think the circular economy of finance here is emerging. We see this with these virtual microgrids. We see this with FinTech in other ways. And I think that it's inexorable, right? It's going to happen. We are just moving along this path. The question is, can we get along the path fast enough to include people and stave off the worst of environmental and social degradation as we go along it? So what, you mentioned this as you guys are working closely on this. Can you give me some ideas from your side? Like, who are the leading lights? Who do you look at around the world? Maybe part of GIFT, maybe not part of GIFT. Who are the organizations, the individuals that really speak to you when you're thinking about this? And who should we all be looking at right now?
So the honest answer is there are quite a few organizations and individuals like yourself who are trying to work at the intersection of cutting edge innovation and sustainability. And in fact, there's a lot of excellent work happening. There are a couple of reports which have come out, which perhaps your viewers can reference to, which was, I think, by the Singapore Management University. But the honest answer again is, at least within the context of the crypto economy, it's far and few given the size of the economy. For a $2 trillion economy, if we have to have a goal of how to allocate $100 billion towards sustainability and inclusion, we are a long way away from there. And that's why I'm so delighted to be here. And that's why we are happy to support folks like you, because there are enough people who are building exchanges or decentralized exchange solutions or building ways for people to earn more money out of their money. But there has to be a model now where some of this money gets funneled into where it is really needed. And it's a controversial statement to make, so nonetheless I'll make it. Perhaps a model which, and I know it's not a very popular thing to say, but China recently has been focusing a lot on common prosperity, and it's hammered a lot of, or sent out a message, subtle and not so subtle, to its leading tech giants that, hey, you've made a lot of money, in an era of easy regulations and policies. Now it's time to support those who have been left behind and creating a common prosperity. And we've seen, the likes of Tencent and Alibaba and all these big guys rise up to the challenge and commit to that. We are probably some ways away from that in the crypto economy, but we need, we don't need to wait for mandates from a tough regime to say that, okay, this is the way to go about it. I think we need to develop that understanding or that awareness within the ecosystem to say that, hey, common prosperity ultimately will work for everybody. It's never a win-lose, unlike what politicians or how media conditions us to think. At the end of the day, as a species, and I'm not saying anything new or rocket science, but we sink or swim together as a species, whether it is in terms of COP26 or common prosperity or in your own way, what you are trying to do in terms of supporting microgrids in Bangladesh and other countries.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it's interesting when a government says that, hey, we do need to have, we're going to push you as large organizations to provide this common prosperity. And, it's like minimum wage, minimum working conditions, environmental regulation, all that kind of stuff. There's a famous economist called Karl Polanyi that talked about this years and years ago, which was that if you don't regulate, you're going to have this environmental degradation, social degradation. In fact, then industries will step in and start to self-regulate because they'll see this wave of resentment coming from people. And it's interesting that the question is, how far do we have to go down that line before that regulation, the self-regulation happens? And as crypto as an industry, there's this opportunity to take hold of this early, because there is so much money, we can do it. And we don't have to, we can do it ourselves. We don't have to wait for governments.
Absolutely. And if I may say, Adam, it's not just about the money. Look at what we are chatting together. Look at your background, look at Simon and all these. This is an industry which has been fueled by a lot of brilliant minds, right? So there is no dearth of talent if it really chooses to develop solutions. From a crypto standpoint, we've seen all those challenges being worked on, whether it is scalability, tier 2 solutions, off-chain, side chains, reducing costs. So if we can solve for those challenges within this circular economy, we need to figure out a way to use the power of all these great minds. It's not just about the money and the investors. There are a lot of brilliant people like you who are working in this ecosystem with a lot of passion. And really, if I were to see it, maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration, but in some little way for us, it is a renaissance moment for humanity as such. And all of us, all you guys who are really doing this great work are the renaissance men of this era. So we don't really now need to wait for somebody else to do it. It's up to us to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I love that, a renaissance, because it's interesting when you say that, because you brought up the metaverse, circular economy, impact, inclusion, and the real world physicality of it. This is not something where a single domain expertise really works. We kind of have to work in a renaissance environment to make this happen. And it is like the Renaissance in Italy. That's where we saw the great works of art be created, because there were times of change and requirements, and it wasn't just science, it was art as well. And that's where NFTs are so interesting, that there's this whole artistic component here. One question I have for you is, because you've worked for very large organizations, and you're a lecturer at the universities, you know big institutions. What's the barrier that still exists between the large organizations, institutions that have been doing development for the last 60, 70 years or so, and where the crypto world is going? How do we overcome some of those barriers? Do you have any examples of where those barriers have been overcome so far?
So again, it's early days, but we are seeing more and more of this acknowledgement. And you look at most of the large banks now, and I know quite a few folks who work in the research groups or in the digital assets groups. So most large banks have actually now gone to a point where they've created divisions within their organizations, which actually focus on the circular economy or digital assets, etc. Are we there yet in terms of working with DeFi? No, because the fundamental idea is decentralized finance. Sounds scary if you're a banker, right? Mm-hmm. The very name has decentralized finance, and you are an intermediary. So how do you create a model, or you create proactively adopt and adapt to a world in which this change is here to come, so rather than being guided by fear, how can you be a part of this ecosystem? It's early days yet, but again, I think a lot of us have an important role, especially folks like us who work 20-25 years in the industry and who understand the world from both sides, to kind of act as evangelists as well, because there is genuinely a lot of fear in traditional organizations that, anyway, first FinTechs came and took their lunch and dinner and breakfast, and now whatever little is left, if everything is going to be automated through smart contracts, then hey, why the heck do you need a bank? So I think there are ways in which banks can play a very important part. And all said and done, I'm not here to discount or trash banks as a lot of crypto maximalists would do. I think there is banks, all said and done, stand for trust. And it's simple. If you and I had to put in our hard-earned money, where would you put it in a trusted organization or a bank? So how can you take that trust and how can you embed it in the decentralized economy is a challenge. And I say that all of us also have a role to play in evangelizing and educating it. And I try and do it in my own little way as an educator as well, because it's not just fear, but it's also that most of the 99% of the bankers are keen to understand it, but they just don't understand it as yet, because as you said, this is a multidisciplinary kind of science meets art. So and that's why I use the term Renaissance moment, because there are so many things which come together here. You are redefining economics, you are redefining money, you are redefining interactions, you are redefining the role of intermediaries, you are redefining payments and kind of combining it with gamification. You are redefining what it means to be rewarded in a circular ecosystem. So these are not very easy concepts for people who've been in the banking industry for 10, 15, 20 years to grasp, and therefore we will have to also kind of offer a hand and say, hey, don't worry, this is the wave of the future, so you cannot escape it, but it is not meant primarily to kill you. Together we can make a better world. So banks can do a great role when it comes to things like trusted custody solutions, etc., creating more trusted liquidity pools, etc., rather than operators some of whom are not the most credible. So you have to take the credibility and the plus. Let's not forget, banks are probably the best out there when it comes to KYC compliance, controls, etc., things which are perhaps very nascent in this industry. So you have to find the take the strengths of these stakeholders, take the strengths of the decentralized finance world, and bring them together. Easier said than done, but perhaps that's where we are trying to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's all that institutional knowledge that exists in these organizations that build over time, and to lose that would be a real shame. And so I think it is absolutely, how do we find those how do we find the collaborative opportunities for the tools that we have in blockchain and crypto to be used in those contexts, and also how does then the traditional institutions shift their mindset to understand, like we're actually talking about it the other way around, and there's so much then we can do together. Before we wrap up, I'd really like to know what your thoughts are for the future on, and maybe we talk about this in terms of inclusion. I mean, with us, with the NFT, the Empowered initiative that we're doing on NFTs right now, it really is about inclusion. How do we take organizations who haven't been involved in crypto before and need funding to help put in clean energy systems? How do we connect that into the crypto system and provide a seamless transaction economy between them? So we see that as inclusion. But what do you think for inclusion in what's going to happen in the next 5 months, 5 years, 50 years? What's that kind of time frame? What does it look like for you?
Thank you for that. And that again is an excellent point to conclude our discussion. So we've seen NFTs evolve in phases like any other thing in crypto and blockchain, right? It starts with a lot of hype. 99.9% of the people get in because of FOMO and all the buzz that is out there without really understanding what it is. But let's try and go back to first principles. As the name suggests, it is very simply a non-fungible token. So it's a token which cannot be replicated. And then we have to come back and go back to the first principles. What are the problem statements, and how can you identify use cases where a technology, not just in terms of tokens, but a token which is unique, what use cases can it solve for? And again, it started off, no surprises there. It started off with art, and if you see the history of social media also, from MySpace to Facebook to Twitter. It was usually the creative folks, the authors, the musicians who were, kind of taken to it among the prime movers, and then politicians and other public figures follow, and then other things, corporates perhaps, are the later participants in that. So we are seeing the same thing in the industry now. It's all about art at the moment, or gaming, but there's so much more a token like this can do. And we talk about inclusion, we talk about transparency, something as simple as land titles. And I know it's not a very sexy topic to talk about. Perhaps in countries like Australia, in the developed world, this isn't even an issue. But in so many parts of the developing world, land titles are not clean, and it's a painful process to change titles, etc. How can you ensure transparency, and therefore unlock the value of assets?
Yes.
And there are many ways, right? You can do it in we've seen examples in agriculture and livestock, etc. And again, coming back to what you guys are doing when it comes to the power grid, there are many use cases, but we have to, like innovators, really start with the problem statement and the use cases rather than starting with the technology.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. So that movement from art, I mean, that was one of the first things sent on the internet was a picture that Tim Berners-Lee sent. It's like, that's, because it says a bunch of things, but of course we built so infinitely more things on top of it. But with us, I mean, we're looking at this for NFTs as a way to represent carbon emissions reductions. Like, how can we take data from IoT devices at the edge, and what it does is transacts through the IOEN protocol, creates NFTs that then represent those tons of carbon that are reduced, and we can actually say, okay, cool, have we hit our targets for carbon emissions reductions? Like, this is a simple way and a pretty easy, low cost way. I mean, we use holochain, so it's very super low cost, but it gives a real understanding of what's happening from the very bottom and moving up to then say, okay, scaling this up to the very top, which would be nationally determined contributions under the climate change regime. And it's really interesting to see then NFTs play a real pivotal role in assurance and understanding that something's happened. And not just the art, but the art is maybe the art is a way to get people in and do it a different way. So yeah, so 5 months, 5 years, 50 years. What do you think 5 months is going to be? What is it going to look like for this kind of inclusion place? What would you like to see in 5 years, and where do you think the world will be in 50?
So, Adam, I always am guided by Amara's law, which I'm sure you and some of the viewers would have heard, that we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but we underestimate it in the long term. So I really fundamentally do not look at, the froth or the hype which happens over 6 months or a year or even 18 months, but we have to look at how this landscape will shift in the next 10 years. And again, the internet offers us all the clues we want of how it has changed, from 1995 to Web 1.0 till the birth of, and we've seen crashes in that as well, right? I was a participant in the 2000.com crash. I'm sure you were involved in some way or fashion. So I have seen the hype cycles. I have seen the crash. We've seen how when the sentiment is the worst is when the next wave of companies come in, the Facebooks, the Twitters of the world, and the likes of Amazon solidify their position. And then since the last 10 years, we've seen the rise of FinTechs, and over the last 5 years, seeds were being planted for the decentralized finance economy. So I have no doubt that in the next 10 years, this is perhaps going to be a larger part of the financial ecosystem than traditional finance and traditional banks. And that's why I tell all my banking friends who are willing to listen, that you can either live in denial or fear, or you can try and make an honest attempt to understand what it is and what could be your role in this ecosystem. Because a lot of it, whether it is NFTs or the gamification of finance per se, has been powered by the millennials. And right now, some of it, like all these meme stocks or meme tokens, etc., may seem cute, funny, even irrational. But let's not forget the largest statement or the intent that from where it is coming. These guys are trying to make a statement against the establishment in their own way. And today they may not have a lot of money, or they may be 19 and 20-year-olds, but in 10 years these guys are going to be the mainstays of the core economy. So how are you going to not just, and I think the traditional finance world has done a great job in trying to maybe offer a great customer user experience. So UI UX focus has been there in banks, at least the good ones and the progressive ones, where they have missed out is really trying to see the underlying emotions or sentiments of what's driving it. So it's not just about creating a great app or a great user experience or 3 clicks. There's something more underneath the surface which is driving it. And unless you understand that, you become a part of that movement in some way. And that's why, the term community is something we see a lot again and again and again in the crypto world. It is a lot about community, right? At the end of the day, as you said, what is the value of a meme stock? It is zero. It is the community which gives it the value, creates the value, sustains the value, and is willing to accept the value of a coin which has a picture of a dog on it. And frankly, as you said, this goes back to the oldest debate or talking point. Since the 1970s, the US dollar is also entirely driven by community acceptance. There is no underlying value, there's no gold, nothing which supports it. So if you do not understand the community aspects, if you do not understand what these millennials are trying to tell you through the gamification of finance, then unfortunately, as a bank, you might, or a financial institution, you might be dead in 10 years, or at least completely marginalized. But if you listen to them carefully, understand, if you adapt to it, if you adopt some of those things, then you will find a place in that ecosystem. So that's where I see, the world in 2030.
Wonderful.
Not the most pleasant place if you are a, former banker or a banker, where you see institutions which have been around for 100 years might not last beyond 10 years. So, these are times of exponential and accelerating change. The opportunities and the challenges are exponential as well.
This is, and virtually everything you just said is exactly the same in the energy industry. That, we've had an industry that's existed for 130 years, and it is now at this time of people want something completely different. They don't want to be beholden to one organization or paying extortionate fees for things that it really is a human right to have equal access to clean energy. And this is shifting. And where the millennials sit in this is they see a different world that doesn't have to be the same as this one that we had for the last 130 years. So,
and if I may say, Adam, you are absolutely spot on, right? It's happening in industry after industry. So it's not just a finance challenge. You look at Tesla and how it's redefining an industry which has never changed. I mean, look at it, the internal combustion engine, and I'm an engineer. So that's what I learned as an engineer. IC engines, it's a technology which has not changed for 100 years. Or you said energy, or you look at banking. These are things which have been around for 100, 150 years. At some point, they will be at their sell-by date, and it's a question of how do you kind of adapt and adopt in that brave new world.
And you're right, and everyone can find a place in the ecosystem. That's the whole point, because people who are holding on to the old world, they have amazing skills in certain parts. If they can transition to the new world, we've got an amazing opportunity to do that. Malik, thank you so much for spending the time with us. We could talk all day on this, and I hope there's a chance to do this in person sometime soon, but it's been absolutely wonderful. And it's great working with Gift. For anyone who's watching, please check the show notes beneath. Join, go to Gift's website, go to the LinkedIn profile, and just, join up. And we can't wait to release the new partnerships and things that we're doing together for these mini-grid initiatives, but also all the work you guys are doing. So thank you, Malik. It's been great to see you.
Thank you. The pleasure was mine.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Bye-bye.